Shalom, dear friends. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. And after a gap of 1 week, we come once again as pilgrims to walk with Jesus on his way. Now, today from Gethsemane to the Jewish trial and then the trial by the Roman authorities, especially that of Pilate. So we will continue from Gethsemane where we stopped during the last session, last Saturday. And the last sentence from Gethsemane was Jesus' statement, his command, get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. So Jesus is in the knowledge of what is going to take place. And Mark tells us immediately the typical Markan phrase, immediately, kai eutus, and immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. So we begin from there. I will share the screen. Judas was mentioned a little earlier, and then Jesus, Mark took us to the Gethsemane, um, the the prayer of Jesus, which was heartrending, and the failure of the disciples. So that's where we drew some conclusions, even with regard to the um, yes, with regard to discipleship. Okay, so today's theme will be Jesus on trial, and we will see two types of trial. One by the Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of the Jewish authorities, Jewish state, and secondly, the Romans. And we will see why the Jewish Sanhedrin could not take the final decision. And after that, Jesus would be taken to the court of Pilate, where he would be condemned to be crucified, and that's what we will be seeing today. Okay. I have also placed here a portrait of Peter, and see the cock there, and the background is an ancient drawing. The people warming themselves at the fire, around the fire, and Peter going weeping. And this is going to be the praxis, to give the praxis of impulse for discipleship, about which I will also state a few minutes later. Okay, so we have two events in this section, verse 43 to 42. The arrest of Jesus, the beginning, later followed by the denial of denial by Peter. We will see the contrast between Jesus, who is resolute in his move towards his own passion and death, and Peter, who is a coward. So we will see this contrast between the two people. Now, as we mentioned in the last session, the final word is about at the Gethsemane was Jesus's declaration. The betrayer is at hand, and that is immediately confirmed by the statement that follows now in verse 43. There is absolutely no delay. Judas is the one leading the arresting party. Okay. They were plotting to arrest Jesus. Judas came forward with the arresting party, and we know that they have been already plotting to arrest Jesus, and there were many moves earlier and they did not succeed. That's why Jesus is not taken by surprise. He submits himself to Father's will. And the arrest is one of the most important scene that is going to take place in the Passion narrative. Jesus was preparing for this from chapter 8 onwards. We have seen already three predictions in chapter 8, 9, and 10, and later during the Last Supper, Jesus predicted about his own passion, death, and resurrection. Now the tragedy strikes home. Judas is explicitly mentioned as one of the 12. The abandonment of his discipleship is now complete, and that's why that is characterized by the arrival of Judas with the enemies of Jesus. Now let's see, Judas is now in full communion with those seeking to destroy Jesus. Chapter 3 of Mark, we saw the reason why Jesus selected Judas, the 12, to be with him, to be sent out. So, to be a disciple and an apostle, to be with him and to be sent out. Gradually, Judas has lost his focus of discipleship, and now this has reached the climax. Now he is completely out of sync with Jesus. Instead, he is in full communion with those seeking to destroy Jesus. The opponents are mentioned as chief priests, scribes, and the elders. So they constitute the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court or the supreme religious Jewish authority. They have sent the crowd, as it is stated here, a crowd that is sent armed with the swords and clubs. Let us look at some parallel passages in the other Gospels. Luke, in his account, gives us another information about the temple police, chapter 22, verse 52, present there to arrest Jesus. John speaks of even the Roman soldiers, chapter 18, verse 3 and 12. So, putting together the accounts of other evangelists, we get a wider picture of a vast group of people. Jesus is almost alone, and all enemies around him. The entire Sanhedrin, the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, the crowd, the temple police, and the Roman soldiers. That shows the magnanimity, the magnitude of the situation. Jesus is in a dangerous zone. The fact that Judas had to give a signal to the party, the signal of kissing, is a sign that this arresting party could not naturally identify Jesus. See, they heard about Jesus, and Jesus was exercising his ministry in Jerusalem. Probably they're all more or less of same age and same size and shape and all that. So it was difficult for them to identify Jesus. And that's the reason why Judas is giving the signal of kissing. And remember, the identification is with a kiss. Now, what is a kiss in the culture, in their culture, kiss is the greatest sign of friendship. Even today in the Middle Eastern society, they embrace each other as a sign of friendship. The, the greatest sign of friendship is turned into a memorable sign of betrayal. So, in the English vocabulary, the phrase "the kiss of Judas" or "Judas kiss" will enter. So, even after 2000 years, the uh, scene of Jesus, of Judas handing over Jesus to the enemies will be remembered. And again, he addresses Jesus as Rabbi. Rabbi. So far, in Mark, Rabbi was used as a respectful address for Jesus. Um, in chapter 9, chapter 10, 51, Rabbi, and 11:21. But in Matthew, it is more significant. Um, Only the disciples who are in the inner circle, they address Jesus as Rabbi, Father. They address Jesus as Kyrie, Lord. Instead, the apostles will address Jesus as Kyrie, and the outsiders will address him as Rabbi. Okay, there's a respect. Um, so there's a way of identifying those who call Jesus as Kyrie, Lord, um, belong to the inner circle of Jesus. And even those who are inside, when they go out of that circle, then they will address Jesus as Rabbi. In Matthew's parallel passage, this is the time that Judas will call him Rabbi. And for the reader of Matthew's Gospel, this is a sign that Judas is already outside this inner group. Okay, so this in Mark, so it has been always a respectful address for Jesus. Yeah, the kiss of Judas will always remain in the mind of people as ultimate expression of treachery, you know, as a betrayal of friendship. Okay. We mentioned this earlier when the anonymous woman came to anoint the body of Jesus. Judas was placed in opposition. She came to prepare the body of Jesus for the burial. um, Judas went to the chief priest to sell the body of Jesus, and that is done here. This is the ultimate action by a treacherous kiss. The kiss of Judas um, is transformed love, that is kiss, into a signal for death. There are a number of cases in the Bible, treacherous use of a kiss. Many passages in the Bible. For example, Absalom in the second book of Samuel had ingratiated himself with those coming to David's court by kissing them. Instead, they would have given him respect, but instead he wanted to get their favor to become the king, to supersede his own father David. And Joab, in the same book, Second Samuel, chapter 20, with a sword hidden in his right hand, disembowels Amara, catching him off guard, first taking his beard and then kissing him. And then, of course, At the end of the, as a result, soon after kissing, of course, he kills him. There are so many of these instances, and this is concluded with the statement from the book of Proverbs, chapter 27. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Okay, now Jesus, knowing that all these are taking place as part of God's plan, does not react to the treachery of Judas. And after this, a bizarre incident accompanies the arrest of Jesus. Um, the statement in verse 50, all of them deserted him and fled. Before that, it is said that the scriptures be fulfilled. So Jesus knows that nothing is taking place by chance, everything as part of God's plan for him. In 1447, one of those who stood by draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the slave of the high priest. That's what we call the bizarre incident. Um, Now, who would be this person who cut the ear of the servant of the high priest? If you look at the other evangelist, uh, one of the disciples, so this disciple was bringing the sword, he was the sword bearer. The other synoptics don't tell us who. John is very specific. He says, Peter, the disciples who cut the ear, and Malchus was the name of the servant. John chapter 18. It's very precise, very specific. And in that section, this provides an occasion for Jesus to teach on non-violence. Okay, that is in the other gospels, not in Mark. In Luke, for example, the compassion of Jesus is shown even in that instance. Jesus touches the ear of Malchus. Malchus, we know from John, or the servant of the high priest, and healed him. So, even that crucial moment, Luke wants to highlight the compassion of Jesus. But Jesus, in Mark's gospel, Jesus does not react at all. Why? It is not one of the it's not one of the disciples in Mark that strikes the servant with the sword. It doesn't say a disciple. So Jesus does not have to bother about it. It's one from the crowd. One from the crowd that came to arrest Jesus. From Mark, it's not an issue because the attacker is not a disciple or one of those with Jesus. So one of the crowd. Jesus reacts, but to the manner of his arrest. So it is not the cutting off the ear that was an interest to Jesus. The what um, matters is the reaction to the manner of the arrest. Here again, we find the contrast between Jesus' own clear integrity and the devious brutality of his opponents. See, they have come out at night, and this night is sacred on the eve of the Passover, when the Jewish people are celebrating the victory of God over the powers of evil, the tyranny of Pharaoh. Here, the same Jewish people who have been liberated now coming to kill their own Lord Jesus. So they want to capture Jesus with the swords and clubs as if he were a robber. Jesus says he taught in the temple in the light of the day, and they have come to capture him at night. His activity of teaching in the temple was done during the day, and what he did had nothing to do with the activity of the robber. But problem was that his wisdom had stunned, shocked the opponents, as we can see again from chapters 11 and 12. And they had no uh, power to arrest him at that time because of the crowd and because of the wisdom that came from his lips. But let the scripture be fulfilled. Yes, all this is taking place in order that the scripture be fulfilled. That is the ultimate meaning of this terrible moment. So all are um, instruments in this big drama, actors in this drama. According to God's will, he was condemned and crucified, as we see the next chapter. The statement, it was according to God's will that he was uh, condemned and crucified. The Greek text um, gives us the impression, not impression, makes it more, makes it clear the fact, the abject failure of the followers of Jesus. That's it, towards the end of that passage in verse 50. And leaving him, they fled, all of them. Mark gives importance to that word, all of them. In Greek, pantes, all, echoes Jesus' own prophetic words earlier. Pantes, all of you will be scandalized in me. And they all fled, left him. Another bizarre episode, just two verses as an epilogue to this whole scene in at Gethsemane. The crowd caught hold of a young man who had been following Jesus. This young man had been garbed only in a linen cloth. He slips out of his garment when they wanted to catch him. The crowd wanted to catch him. In fact, they caught hold of him, but he slipped out of this garment and fled naked. That's what these two verses say. So first verse tells us, verse 51, that he wanted to be a follower, or he was following Jesus. The second says he was caught, but he escaped, leaving the garment, fleeing naked. This particular incident has caught the attention of many exegetes, people with imagination, who created many fanciful theories regarding the identity of this young man. Who is this young man? Many people are curious about the identity. Right from the fathers of the church, and even some scholars and commentators state that this young man went naked is Mark himself. He does not want to mention his name. So he is um, giving us the detail that he was a follower of Jesus, but he was following him from distance. So he does not want to tell us that he was the one, but he wants to give us enough clue to state that he was the one. Okay, nobody else sees it, and he doesn't want to mention his name. So this particular statement has caught the attention of many people, and even now, some people would like to state, yes, this is Mark himself. These two verses are part of his autobiography. Okay, very fanciful theory, interesting statement. See, in Acts 12:12, we know of John Mark, a resident of Jerusalem, in whose house they say that Jesus and his disciples ate the Passover meal. Okay, this is by a statement by the fathers of the church. Okay, we don't have any proof that it was in John Mark's house that Jesus celebrated the Passover meal. But this is a statement from some of the fathers of the church, and people still believe that. Mark is not actually interested in telling us the identity of the young man. If we needed to know, he would have mentioned the name. Many other places he mentions people by name. We have seen the beggar on the way to Jericho, beggar by the wayside, Bartimaeus. There are other names. Why did not? Why didn't Jesus Mark not mention this? There's a reason. So the symbolic value of the incident. When people are anonymous in Mark's Gospel, we got to look at the symbolic value. Like the anonymous woman, Mark was not interested in telling us who that woman was. But what she did was important for Jesus, for Mark, and for us. And this is a unique text only in Mark. Now look at the Greek words used, and that will give us enough material to understand what this text would imply. The Greek word that is used is neaniskos, young man. Same word is used in chapter 16:5 at the resurrection scene for that young man who greeted the women at the empty tomb. Neaniskos, same word in chapter 15, chapter 14, and now in chapter 16:5. Again, same word, the linen cloth, sindona, and the sindona was the linen garment, the dress that covered the young man. And same word, sindona, is used to describe the burial cloth of Jesus in chapter 15:46. Sindona. So many today would say that this story is a prelude to the resurrection story. Prelude to the resurrection story. As Jesus will ultimately shed his burial garments and escape from the clutches of death. So Jesus, this young man, escaped, leaving his garment, and Jesus, leaving his garment in the tomb, will escape the clutches of death. So there are. This is one important explanation given by the exegetes. Again, disciples who had left all to follow Jesus, now in the crisis of the passion, abandon everything. So this A young man represents the disciples who had at the beginning of the ministry, chapter 1, verse 16 to 20, the two pairs of brothers at the Sea of Galilee left all, even the parents, to follow Jesus. Now, in this moment of crisis of the passion, they abandon everything. Their allegiance to Jesus, the word that they gave to Jesus, even if everyone else abandons you, I will not. And even their clothing. Now, this clothing has an important value in the Bible. Cloth, the robe, symbolizes the person. It is the identity of the man. Remember in the story of Joseph in Genesis, after the brothers of Joseph bring the garb, yeah, the robe of Joseph soaked in blood, immediately Jacob identified, yes, this is my son. The dress symbolized, okay, this belongs to my son, so that symbolized his own death. Later in the same story, Joseph, um, Joseph had a struggle with Potiphar's wife, and she took the garment from Joseph and proved as a sign of Joseph's seduction, is his attempt to seduce and rape. And seeing the dress, they identified Joseph's cloth. The robe is a symbol of the person identity in the Bible. So this young man leaving the cloth, leaving the robe to escape from being caught is a sign of a disciple who left everything. So this is a lesson for the Christian reader. The Christian reader is compelled to ponder the tenacity of one's commitment. So the reader of Mark's Gospel is a disciple or a prospective disciple. So it is possible that at that moment of decision, due to cowardice, they may escape. We find a perfect example or of a failed discipleship. We'll also see soon this is a preparation for another important failed discipleship in the case of Peter. Okay, so this model of discipleship before the crucifixion. Um, so compare this to the young man in chapter 16. I said the same vocabulary is used. Here, the young man runs away naked to escape. The other young man at the tomb in chapter 16:5 is clothed in white robe, highly symbolic. He is clothed and in white robe. He is sitting, not running away, and proclaiming. Yes, he is the one who disseminates the message of the resurrection to the women. So this young man is the model of genuine discipleship, and the other young man in chapter 14 is a symbol of failed discipleship. Okay, so this I think is very symbolic for Mark. So we don't have to do all our research to find out who that young man was. Not important. If it were to be important, Mark would have told us. The symbolic significance, value of the text is important. We move on. The setting is now in the court of the high priest. We are moving from Gethsemane to the court of the high priest, where the Jewish trial begins. From verse 53 onwards. It's like the big drama of this passion, as Mark is a great dramatist, is a good director of a drama. He gives Jesus and his lingering disciple Peter in view. And around these two people swirl the events that dominate this section, Peter and Jesus. So both are seen to the audience. See, already from chapter 8, with Peter's confession, um, we were slowly introduced to Peter's understanding of Jesus. Um, Later, he said he would never abandon Jesus. Now look at the contrast. In chapter 8, Peter said, "You are Son of God. You are the Mashiach, the Messiah, the Christos." Now, vehement denial by Peter that he is a disciple. Um, so let's go to the text. 53. They took Jesus to the high priest. Who are they? The crowd that came with the sword and wooden clubs to the house of the high priest. Again, as typical of Mark does not name the high priest. But we have the other gospels that tell us, gospel according to Matthew and the Jewish historian Josephus tell us that the name of the high priest was Caiaphas. From history, we know that Caiaphas held office of the high priest from 18 to 36, sorry, not BC, CE or Common Era or AD. Okay, it's not BC, 18 to 36 AD. The trial now takes place at the house of Caiaphas. Looking at that text, we know the whole Sanhedrin is present there. The Sanhedrin, as we know, the highest Jewish court of law. It consists of the chief priest, the elders, and the scribes. The Sanhedrin is presided over by the high priest. Looking at verse 54, the very next, so just giving us one verse about Jesus being brought to the house of Caiaphas, where the Sanhedrin is held. Immediately after that, Mark takes us to Peter. The very next statement refers to Peter, who followed him at a distance. I think that statement is purposely given. Peter follows him at a distance. What was the purpose of Jesus selecting Peter and nominating him as part of this college of the apostles, and later giving him the primary role to be with him, to be with him? And Mark makes this pertinent statement. He followed him at a distance. But he follows Jesus to the courtyard of the high priest. There, it was evenings are cold, nights are cold, and he was warming himself at the fire with the gods. We will see the trial. The trial of Jesus is situated in the narrative about Peter. So both are seen there. We will see the contrasting personalities here, Jesus and Peter. The striking contrast between the reply of Jesus and that of Peter when questioned. Jesus unequivocally declares that he is the Messiah. Jesus said, I am. That emphatic statement. What about Peter? He emphatically denied even any knowledge of Jesus. And not once, several times. Okay, trial begins by taking evidence against Jesus. The result was actually decided even before the trial began. We have been already informed in verse chapter 3 6, 11 18, 12 12, and 14 1 that they plotted to arrest him and to kill him. And unfortunately for them, it was not possible. Now the trial goes, they have to give testimony because, as per the book of Numbers, Deuteronomy, at least two people are needed as a witness in order to sustain a charge. So many gave false testimony. Repeatedly said there was a false witness against Jesus. And that is an indication for the reader to know the innocence of Jesus. Verse 56 and even 55, they were looking for testimony, but they found none. Many gave false testimony, but their testimony did not agree. Again, verse 57, some stood up and gave false testimony against him. Okay. Even verse 59, but even on this point, their testimony did not agree. Okay. So the early church, looking at the scene, they bring in the case of the suffering servant, the suffering of the just one. That several of them indicate the suffering of the just one. For example, two Psalms I have given here. Psalm 27:12. Do not abandon me to the will of my foes. False witnesses have risen against me and are breathing out violence. Psalm 35:11. False witnesses come forward against me, asking me questions I cannot answer. They cross examine me. The testimony, the final accusation or final testimony, false testimony, is regarding the statement of Jesus about the Bible, about the temple. It says, I will destroy this temple that is made with the hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Jesus had said about the destruction, and in 3 days he would build later, build another. But maybe that statement made with hands and not made with hands. So Jesus is like a wizard, uh, destroying human destruction and a divine construction. Okay, so that is equivalent to blasphemy. But even here, Mark tells us that there was no agreement on this charge either. But we come to the climax of this Jewish trial, which is important for Mark and for us, for the reader. The climax of the trial is Christological, and that is the point that we want to highlight. The high priest was annoyed by the inadmissible testimonies and Jesus' own silence. Now will intervene personally, standing in the midst of the assembly, asked Jesus, "Have you no answer?" So that is highly official. The high priest, before declaring um, the verdict, would make this statement standing up, which is part of the trial and the official statement. Uh, this the standing is in fact important, and that is um, part of the um, official way that Caiaphas or the high priest is going to make the statement. Okay, yeah. Um, the same question, "Have you no answer?" would again be asked in chapter 15 by Pilate. Same question, "Have you no answer?" Jesus had remained silent all throughout. Uh, Now he will answer. When it comes, see, throughout the um, public life of Jesus, Jesus was rather shy in making statements about himself. Now, when the question is asked, "Are you the Christ, Son of the Blessed?" Solemn reply from Jesus, emphatic, "Yes, I am." This is the first and only time in Mark Jesus acknowledges his messiahship openly and unequivocally. The question of the high priest and the answer of Jesus is the high point of the trial, the Jewish trial. This is a climax. This is the heart of the this trial. The Christological question by high priest and the emphatic answer by Jesus. Christological. Because we have through the gospel at the beginning, very beginning, chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And at baptism, chapter 1, at the transfiguration, chapter 9, and by Peter at the Caesarea Philippi, chapter 8:29. We have all seen, even at um, yeah. Um, but at the time when Peter declared Jesus as the Christos, Messiah, Messiah, Jesus tried to silence Peter then, and at that time he interpreted Messiah in terms of suffering Son of Man. But now see, at a trial, Jesus interpreted the Messiah as the glorious Son of Man. He- uh, this is most important Christological titles of Mark's Gospel. When all the titles of Jesus are brought together, Christ, Son of God, and Son of Man. Christ, Son of God, Son of Man. Christ is Messiah. So here, the Markan Christology reaches its culminating point. In verse 61, 62, the statement from Daniel 7:13, which is influenced by Psalm 110:1, the Jewish way of referring to God, the Son of Man, seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. It's a symbolic way of a Jewish way of referring to God. When Jesus made this statement, the high priest considered this as blasphemy. That's why high priest tore his garments, indicating horror at hearing a blasphemy. There are many reactions to this. Chapter 44 of Acts and Joel, many places, people uh, tear the tearing of the garment. In the Old Testament, there are many passages because tearing the garment um, symbolizes one's grief or shock. See, especially at the death of a loved one. Genesis chapter 37, 34, when Jacob heard about the death of his son Joseph. In Joshua chapter 7, 2 Samuel chapter 1, and 2 Kings chapter 2. So, the action of the chief priest here suggests that his grief on hearing or his shock on hearing Jesus' response was as great as if he heard about the death of a loved one, the blasphemy. I told you that judges stand up, and especially in the case trial for blasphemy, this is a statement from the report of the Sanhedrin. They stand on their feet and tear their clothing and never stitch them back up. So, this is a quotation from the documents. Um, then this high priest would force others to condemn Jesus as deserving death. So the text states that there was a unanimous verdict regarding the condemnation of Jesus. It says all of them condemned Jesus to death. But the parallel passage in Luke chapter 23, there was an exception. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, did not did not give assent to this um, condemnation of Jesus. Now let's get back to our Jewish trial, and we'll conclude that the trial scene ends with a mockery. Some begin to spit, some blindfold Jesus, and others strike on his face. Here we find the abject scene of torture and derision, which jolts the reader into the reality of suffering. So the passion begins. The description of the torment rained on Jesus echoes the suffering servant in Isaiah, which all of us know. Chapter 50, verse 6. I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to those who pulled out the beard. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. The word taunt, or the taunt prophecy, the word taunting word prophesy, is the final ironic commentary on the scene. So the person who struck him would say, prophesy. Because this prophet had made declarations about the future of the temple, and he claimed that he would rebuild this temple in 3 days. And he says, now prophesy. Prophesy. Who struck you? So he is asked to play the prophet again. He is blindfolded. Now he has to identify the one who struck him. We move on. The flood lights of the Markan drama shifts again to Peter. Now the focus is on Peter. He is warming himself before the fire in the courtyard. The accusation begins. First is a private confrontation between Peter and this servant girl. So she stared at him and said, "Yes, you were also with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." He denied it. He said, "I do not understand." Then, as he denied, many people heard. They were, and the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "Yes, this man is one of them." Again, Peter denied. Then, after a while, the bystanders again said to Peter, so repeated accusation by the bystanders. Okay, the yes. There he said, "Yes, you were with Nazarene. You were with the Nazarene Jesus." Um, Now, with when you say with, you're one of them or with Jesus, that's is reference to discipleship. No, chapter 3, to be with Jesus, and throughout the gospel, to be with Jesus refers to the discipleship. And he said, "No, I'm was not." First, Peter's answer was evasive. Then he pretends not to understand what she was saying. And secondly, the denial is more definite, and he finally denies that he is one of them. In fact, even he curses himself, but he began to curse and he swore an oath. "I do not know this man you are talking about. I do not know this man you are talking about." How did they know that Peter was a Galilean? Maybe um, the what do you call the dialect that he spoke. The dialect that he spoke. Um, Come back to this. Or because the dialect that he spoke, but more than that, the Galilee evokes something more important. It was in Galilee that Jesus chose Peter to be with him. It was there on the before he began journey that Peter declared the messiahship, recognized the identity of Jesus. And unfortunately, now Peter denies any previous knowledge of Jesus and his association with him. And even using an oath, invokes a curse on himself. So there's a denial that progresses in intensity, leading to the final denial. And the cock crowed 3 times. And Peter remembered what he had said earlier, that he would never deny Jesus. So 3 times, and Jesus had made this statement that before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. In verse 72, the moment the cock crowed for the second time, and it was then that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." We have this. This is a famous a poem. Maybe some of you may have heard this. "Peter, Peter, look at Jesus. Soldiers have snatched him away. They are going to hurt him. Don't you have something to say?" And the statement, "Never, never did I know him." Peter was scared as he lied that the cock crowed, twice, and Peter ran home and cried. And the last part, Peter broke down and wept. That gives the impetus to the whole praxis of discipleship. We'll mention about that a little later. There's a sharp contrast between Peter and Jesus. Uh, Both Peter and Jesus are on trial, but the behavior of both is very different. Jesus publicly affirmed his status, I am, when he was asked whether you are the Messiah. Instead, Peter denies Jesus and his own status as a disciple. And here, Mark once again brings the all pervading theme of the incomprehensibility of the disciple and the blindness of disciple. We have seen that throughout in the parables and in the miracle stories. This um, incident of Peter denying Jesus must be really historical. Why? It no that disciple of Peter in Rome, no Christian in Rome would have liked to see the founder of their church in a bad light if this had not taken place. But this serves as a crucial reflection of discipleship. The fearless confession of Jesus that he is the Messiah is in bold contrast to Peter's frightened denial. Okay. Um, the response of Peter when he was asked, neither know nor understand. These two words, to know and to understand, in Mark, knowing and understanding form the essential part of the language for faith in Jesus. So it is not just a theory to know, to understand, just not just cognitive, but it is of the will and the heart to faith in Jesus. So lack of understanding from the part of Jesus, Jesus scolded them. Do you not understand? You lack understanding. While Jesus was walking on the sea, he scolded them. Um, the last words in the section, he broke down and wept, collapse in tears, collapse in tears. That is the result of a discipleship that is restored. This is a sign of a discipleship that is restored. And these tears are not tears of despair, but tears of remorse. The vocabulary that is used will indicate that. In Matthew's Gospel, there is this clear difference between what happened to Judas. It is tear of despair, and the vocabulary that is used for Peter, the tears of remorse. This provides a lesson for the community of Mark. What is that lesson? The flight of the disciples and the denial of Peter both would become part of the gospel. Good news. That is taking place even today. It existed for the church of Mark in Rome. Flight of the disciples, denial by Peter. Christian community is very well aware that there are failures taking place everywhere, and the Christians have to make a terrible choice between fidelity to truth leading to suffering, as Jesus exemplified in his statement and life, fidelity to truth, which leads to suffering, or cowardice, the 12 disciples who ran away, and it's apparent safety as Peter escaped from condemnation and death. But this gives an impetus for the church in Rome. Peter in Rome continued to be an apostle in true sense, one who is sent out, one who is sent, and he becomes a martyr. And he becomes a martyr. So repentance and forgiveness are still possible. Jesus had said, I will go ahead and I will meet you in Galilee. The disciples who will meet them are a reformed sort of people. Okay. So Peter is an example in both ways of a person who denies Jesus and a person who accepts forgiveness, who receives forgiveness. Okay, that's how we end chapter 14. We move to chapter 15. The uh, Jewish trial is over, and now we move to the trial by the Romans. Chapter 15 tells us, beginning, it says, so previously the Jewish trial was at night. Now it's early morning. In the morning, the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. So the entire Sanhedrin was present. This verdict given by them is official and as a result of a collective responsibility. They all unanimously decide to condemn Jesus. Now there is a problem. Sanhedrin does not have the right to issue a death sentence. They want to kill Jesus, but they don't have the power. It is invested with the Romans, the political government. The problem is, under the Roman law, blasphemy cannot be a crime that can lead to death. No? So blasphemy was not a crime to be awarded death sentence. So the Sanhedrin has to pass on the accusation to the political authorities. The problem with these political authorities, uh, the blasphemy, which is a crime for the Jews, is not a crime of great importance. So, what did the Sanhedrin do? They turned this accusation of blasphemy to a political crime of treason. So, they bind Jesus and send him to the Roman governor as a criminal. So he is bound as a sign that he is a criminal. And there he is not accused of blasphemy, but charged with the crime of treason. The question of Pilate to Jesus is so political. So he asked, are you the king of the Jews? So already Pilate was informed, he was communicated that the crime that Jesus did was something of a treason, that he claimed himself to be the king. We are told many charges were leveled at him. Verse 3, and the chief priest accused him of many things. We are not told about the details of that. See how many charges they bring against you. Jesus made no further reply. Earlier he said, you say so. So that Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. See, this Pilate was a political nominee by the by the Romans, and he is the political head representing Romans. And Bible tells us, or rather, Josephus and other historians Also, we have indications from the gospel writers that he was a very cruel person. In fact, later, Josephus in his history will say that he ended his life committing suicide. Pilate is portrayed in a very negative picture by the contemporaries. He was a cruel person. Um, we have it's almost time. I'll just conclude this part. See, there are two similarity between the Jewish trial in chapter 14 and the Roman trial. Um, both are okay. The Jewish trial is by the Sanhedrin. The Roman trial is with the Roman governor, and we know it's Pilate. The accusation of the Jewish trial was blasphemy. What was that? He claimed to be the Messiah and he claimed to be the Son of God, which is a religious crime. He can be killed. And the political accusation that he claimed to be the king, a political crime. And the condemnation was that the Jewish trial, he was condemned to death, and the political trial he was delivered to be crucified. And we'll see the details in the next class. If there are questions, we will take up for a few minutes before we conclude the day.
There are a few questions. Why is cutting off the ear of a servant is a bizarre moment?
Yeah, violence is um, see Jesus, who stood for non-violence all throughout his life, and they are at the beginning of his passion. Already violence takes place, and but Mark is not interested in telling, or Mark does not tell us that the one who did the violence is a disciple of Jesus. But in other gospels, it will be specified, and so that will provide an occasion for Jesus to speak against violence, speak for non-violence. It says it is he would be killed in a violent way, but disciples should never succumb to the temptation of acting on violence.
Another one more. Does the passion start with the arrest, Mark 14, 46, or with the mockery, Mark 14:65? Peter invoked a curse on himself. What was
Theologically, for Mark, the passion begins already in chapter 1. When John was delivered up, paradidomi, the Greek word. So right from the beginning of Mark's Gospel, the issue of handing over the passion and death of Jesus loom very prominent. So the passion begins right from the beginning or the moment of his public ministry, and he starts with accusation already from chapter 3. Already in chapter 3, the chief priest and the leaders, they come together, they plot in order to arrest and kill Jesus. They want to kill Jesus. So the passion really begins right at the beginning, and then the last two day from the last Thursday of Jesus' life and Friday is only the culmination, conclusion. Okay. Okay, so we conclude this day. We go more into the intense suffering that we'll see tomorrow. And then the death of Jesus will take place in our class tomorrow. death and the resurrection will be followed the, the next week, and with that we like to conclude. Yeah. So we'll conclude this day with seeking God's blessing. May the peace of the Lord be with you always, and may the Almighty Lord bless us, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a wonderful Friday evening, those of hearing, and that will take us to the new weekend. See you tomorrow. God bless. Good night.